Good evening, students. Today, we're going to talk about rising powers and possibly Middle East. Let's see how long the lecture. I might break it into two or just one. Rising powers. Now, in the global economy, there are powers which are rising at a dramatic rate compared to the developed nations like United States, Western European countries. So, what are these rising powers which we are going to talk about today? It's created as an acronym BRIC, BRIC. Sometimes people add the S also, BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the S could be South Africa. South Africa is not as growing dramatically as these four, but let's discuss this main four especially. So let's start with China. You all know China has been a communistic country under Mao Zedong's rule, and for a long time it was not doing well economically. It's a communistic country with state-controlled economic policies, and Cultural Revolution and a Great Leap Forward, all these programs of Mao Zedong has killed millions of people. Now, Deng Xiaoping, this was right after Mao Zedong's death, a man named Deng Xiaoping came to power. And he created something little new for China. And that is, he introduced capitalism with the communistic authoritarian government. He said, well, does it matter whether it is a black cat or a white cat as long as the good cat catches the mouse? What is he talking about? He is talking about to improve the power of the state. And so he created special economic zones, in short form SEZ. Special economic zones were created in especially southern part of China, closer to the ocean for trade and purposes, Guangdong region. And when they changed this region to allow them to do capitalism, an entrepreneurial spirit is unleashed. It created a new wave of growth in China. And Deng Xiaoping then opened that for the entire country. So since 1980s, China is growing for 30 years from 1980s onwards at a breakneck speed of about 10% on average every year. Can you imagine growing at 10% on average every year? The West hasn't seen a growth like that. The world has never seen a growth like that. History has never, ever seen any growth like this, any country. It brought out hundreds of millions of Chinese out of poverty. So what happened was that in the 1980s, there was also a Tiananmen Square protest. You probably would have seen a man trying to stop a tank going on each side. When the tank turns, he tries to block this way. When it turns this way, he comes this way. And you would have seen this video. By the way, you can't see those in China because it's not available. Even if you Google or anything, it won't come up. The state has complete control over what past history people can see. Now, these protesters protested for a democracy, and it was a crackdown. Completely, military was sent, and many of the students were killed and arrested. So Tiananmen Square protest is a very famous incident that China kept its control of its government, communistic government. It controls still not only the media, as we talked about, what you could Google and what you could see. Many of the Western IT and not IT, Silicon Valley companies doesn't exist in China. So not only media, they also have control over military. Okay, the Chinese military and information, what information is passed on to the people. Now, what it created was it also created inequality. When economy grew at such a pace, it left behind a lot of people in its havoc. Because of its growth, dramatic growth, it created environmental problems. There are many books have been written on cost of China's economic growth. The cost of China's economic growth leads from environment to that of people. There are people who worked in, for example, gemstones, the cheap jewelry you get in Walmart made in China. And these jewelry were grounded in workshops by people who are not even wearing masks and breathing the stones powders when it's get ground every day and out, and which created a disease called pneumoconiosis, which is like an irreversible lung condition. They shrivel, some of these men, and the wives were not able to even afford to take them to a hospital in a taxi. Some of them have sad stories of carrying them, husband, shriveled husband, in the back. So here in the West, we have OSHA, Occupational Safety Health Administration, and we have workers' rights safety protocol. It's not in the Chinese economic growth model, and very rarely now it's changing, but very rarely people succeed in suing the state for a lawsuit. They cannot win. They cannot win. So people's lives were destroyed, and also environment, the pollution it creates. The environmental pollution ranges from climate change due to high use of coal and fossil fuels. To remind you, coal, natural gas, and oil are the three high pollutants of CO2. And CO2 increases climate change, right? And climate change increases the amount of temperature, average temperature rise around the world. And the ramifications of it, of rise in temperature increases drought, increases in flash floods, and fires, and rising ocean levels, and destruction of biodiversity, and the list goes on. But China and India uses enormous amount of fossil fuels that increases climate change. And the West cannot go and preach, because the West has been using climate fossil fuels for its development. Now it's their turn for development, they perceive. And so they didn't want to stop that in any way, because alternative fuels cost enormous amount of money. I mean, the price difference is small in kilowatt per hour, but when you add up, it's a big number in a usage for an entire country per year. So many of their reactors, power producing reactors, are coal powered fuel reactors. Okay, because coal is cheaper. Okay, and so a Chinese growth has produced environmental destruction, from rivers getting polluted to that of smogs in some of the large cities, which you can't even see, smog like fog particles floating in the air that more than 10-15 feet you can't see clarity. And this pollution doesn't contain just to China. It's open space, open air, the world, and it travels. Sometimes Japan has given money to clean China's pollution because it creates acid rain in Japan, and pollutants coming to Japan creates apple growth and others problem. Sometimes it even crosses the Pacific Ocean and comes to California. Can you believe? All the way half across the world. So pollutants are not just to the country which pollutes it. It pollutes the rest of the country, which didn't even have the benefits of Chinese economic growth. Indirectly it might, but not directly, and still has to pay the cost of the pollution. So Chinese growth. You could talk more about it, but I wanted to talk about other countries as well. India's growth happened not in the 1980s, in the 1990s. Up till 1990s, it's state controlled. You probably would have seen it in the documentary Commanding Heights, that India was more leaning towards the Soviet Union during Cold War, even though it's country of neutrality. And I grew up in India, and with a lot of 5 year plans, models, and when I grew up, there were only two different models of cars I could see in the road, like Ambassador is a car, and there's another one like Fiat, which is from Italy. But now any car, you name it, any car, just like in the Western countries, you could see in the Indian roads. Whether they are suitable to Indian roads or not, that's a different question. But from Rolls Royce to Ferraris to Lamborghinis, all type of cars. That's because of free market. So India, unlike China, is not an authoritarian government. The Chinese have a communistic party, and Politburo is in the top, and the president, now President Xi Jinping, is announced himself as the president for life, right? Whereas in India, it's a democracy. Since 1947, India got its independence from Great Britain, and it was under state planned policies of economy, state planned economy, and it was a very dramatic, slow growth. And in case you didn't know, India, when the British came to India, India was about 25% of the world's economy. That's like the United States now, 25% of the world's economy. Now, but when the British were leaving us after swindling all the resources, India's economy fell to about 2 to 3%, right? And so India's economy after that grew very slowly until 1990s. We had a finance minister who had his PhD from Oxford in economics. So he talked to the prime minister, then Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, to create a free market economics and not a state planned economy, and liberalizing the economy and releasing the powers of Indian entrepreneurship. And India had advantages that the Chinese didn't have. Of course, India started later than the Chinese, and Chinese, there's a much larger country and much larger population. Just now, India overtook China in population, and India also has more potential for growth. Currently, India is the fastest growing economy in the world currently, because China's growth fell down. For 30 years, they grew at a breakneck speed of 10%. Now it's less. But uh, India is the fastest growing economy in the world, and it has youth bulge, which means more people are younger. That is good for the economy because they will be working and contributing to the economy. Older people will retire, and they will depend on on the state or the savings or family members to take care of themselves. They are not contributing. They become, in a way, relying on something to be provided. So Chinese population is aging just like the West. The Western population has been aging more faster. Japan, much faster aging population. But let's focus on India. India's growth was dramatic as well. And one of the things which at least India had that Chinese didn't have was not only the youth, but also English, because the British ruled English as a medium of communication. And it also revolutionized IT, IT fields, because the world came shrunk through globalization, optical cable nets, fiber networks under the Atlantic Ocean, connecting the Europe and America and the rest of the world, is easy to transmit data through the optical cable networks. And when it becomes cheaper, you could send your work to another country offshoring, and make them complete there and send it back. Like for example, now even in the United States, radiology data could be sent to radiologists in India and studied and interpreted and written up and passed back. Many things which could be broken down into bits and bytes could be sent. And so many companies were able to use and take advantage of that. And Western country companies and used India as a place for getting their work done in cheaper fashion. And India's economy started also, even though they were paid much lesser than the Western employee of similar caliber would get paid, but it is still an economic boom for India, and it produced more engineers, just like China was producing for a long time. Now, because of the Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh, they agreed to create that. The India's economy started to take off. Now, currently, Narendra Modi is the prime minister. India has a prime minister system. It's a democracy, as I said, since 1947. It uses the similar model of the Britain. Of course, it also has parts of the U.S. Constitution. It has used many countries' constitution. It is the largest constitution in the world, India, and it has a very good checks and balances with the parliament as the legislative branch and the executive branch, the prime minister and the Supreme Court, and the figurehead, the president. And India's growth is expected to grow better and better with the more population, younger population, and it is the fastest growing economy in the world. Now let's talk about Russia. BRICS, BRIC, right? Russia, when the Soviet Union collapsed, it collapsed in the early 1990s, but it started even with before that. Why did it collapse? Some people even blame Gorbachev. Gorbachev was a leader, was the last communist leader of Soviet Union, and he started seeing the economy frailing, getting weak. So he wanted to liberalize, improve the economy. What did he do? He created two policies. One is called Glasnost. I'm going to spell it Glasnost. Glasnost. This is transparency. And another one policy is called Perestroika. Perestroika, Perestroika. Perestroika policy means like rebuilding, structural reform. And these two policies, even though it's liberal policies, it created an opportunity for many countries which were under the yoke, iron grip of Russia as one Soviet Union, got dismembered. And about 15 countries came out of the Soviet Union. So Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, and the list, Georgia, all the countries which we have in the Eastern Europe were under Warsaw Pact, right? And these countries came out as independent and started to function independently, have their own forms of autonomous governments. And so Soviet Union, when it collapsed, Russia had a first president, and still Russia has the largest landmass in the world, despite getting dismembered, the Soviet Union getting dismembered. It has 11 time zones, and but Russia has problems. I'll tell you. One is dwindling population, okay, and longevity is decreasing. And Russia's economy, even in good times, is not larger than California's economy, for example, right? You cannot compare it to the United States economy. Obama one time called it it's a regional power. It's not anymore global power, which was rivaling the United States, right? So Boris Elstine, the first president, was very warming up with the West, and he wanted to create democracy and capitalism. But the capitalism he created was crony capitalism, which is giving favors to the people he knew, and they were rent seeking. Many of these oligarchs, you heard of these names, oligarchs, Oligarchs. These oligarchs were businessmen who were taking advantage of the state, and it's called rent seeking towards. So if there is a mine, say it's an oil field, belong to the state. I'm just going to just use a number, approximately $100 million approximately worth to buy it, but you as a businessman buy it for $10 million. Already you made $90 million. That's a rent seeking. $90 million. This is even before you extract this oil and export it and make business profits. And who does this 90 million profit you, the businessman, made, the oligarch? It belongs to the state, it belongs to the people of Russia. So some people started becoming very wealthy. These are oligarchs who become billionaires. And why would Yeltsin or anyone give it to them? Well, it is like you scratch my back, I scratch your back. So by giving these deals, if Yeltsin wants to run for office, he get money back, kickbacks from this oligarchs to run for office. Yeltsin also didn't care that Boris is Boris. Yeltsin is Yeltsin. 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 And he didn't care when people criticized him on TV or anything. Uh, just like in America, if anybody criticizes, the politician can't do anything, just suck it up. He would just change the channel, right? Wait till I give you the comparison between him and Putin. Now, he even came to the West. He was a big alcoholic, always taking fond of the bottles and gets drunk even in public ceremonies. And he was waiting outside the Washington hotel, DC hotel, one time without his bodyguards in the middle of the night to go and get a pizza. He was hailing a cab. This man was the president of Russia and trying to create democracy and capitalism coming out of authoritarian and communistic model, right? Now, when when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was, I'm introducing another story. When Soviet Union was collapsing, there was East Berlin and West Berlin divided, right? For those who don't know, East Berlin belonged to the Soviet Union and West Berlin belonged to the United States, because during World War II, the Russians start pushing the Nazis, fighting them back, and came all the way to Berlin. The United States, we had a D-Day along with UK, right? And we went in France and we met them, and so in Berlin, and we divided the Berlin into East Berlin and West Berlin. West Berlin was capitalistic, democratic, and East Berlin was authoritarian and communistic. Many people from East Berlin were running to the West Berlin, and anyone who had skills, because the pay was 6-8 times higher. So the government started building a wall to prevent people from going to the other side. It's Berlin Wall. You probably heard of it. It came down in 1989, right? And if you want to remember the date, what it's like, reverse the 9/11, 11/9/89. You know, 9/11, the incident. So it's reverse that. Berlin Wall, when it came down, people in East Germany, when they protested and marched, there was a man. His name is Putin. He worked for KGB, and he was burning all the documents of the KGB office in East Berlin. And he even told the protesters on the gate, do not enter. If you enter, there are guards inside who will shoot you. There were no guards or anybody to shoot them. But he bluffed and he succeeded. But he was upset at Gorbachev for creating these programs which dismembered the Soviet Union. He wants a strong Soviet Union. And he went back um, after losing the East Germany to become a capitalistic society, merging with the West Germany, he went back to Russia. He started working with the mayor and slowly moved up the ladder of politics. If you are interested, read. There are many biographies on Putin, but the best I think is Last Tsar, the Last Tsar, Tsar. And it's a good one of Putin, and it's well written. It shows Putin was trying to climb up the ladder faster and become prime minister. You know, prime ministers come and go. President has the power in Russia, and it's the semi-presidential system. In case you didn't know what kind of system, India has a parliamentarian system with just prime minister and the president is figurehead. In Russia, the president has the power of foreign policy, everything. Putin knows prime ministers come and go, and his days are numbered. So he wants to do something that will make sure he stays in power. When there was a protest in Chechnya, Chechnya was having a separatist movement, uh, and they want a separate country. They're Muslims. Putin used excessive military force and did scorched earth policy to suppress. But Russians felt that we finally have a strong leader, and they have very high up opinion numbers for him, poll numbers. The president Yeltsin was ailing because of his one of his reasons was alcoholism. He wasn't that old, and so he asked Putin one day during lunch, "Would you like to be president of Russia?" Putin took some time and then said yes. The power transformation itself is very interesting. Putin walking in with vigorous youthful walk and Yeltsin going so weak, and he told Putin, "Take care of Russia." And he's like, "Oh yeah." And he walked out. He didn't live long after that. Putin took over power. He told the oligarchs, "You could make all the money you want, but do not think about criticizing or stepping into the arena of politics." Those who dared him and criticized him on TV faced brutal consequences, ranging from murder to threat. Some of them journalists who escaped and all the way went to even England were tracked down and killed by FSB agents. So in Putin's Russia, he the, there's you might ask, what is the deal for the people? Uh, the deal is to give the glorious Russian past. If you look at Russia, had for hundreds of years, from 1680, I think, from czars rule. Okay, in the 1917, it was overthrown, the last czar, and then was replaced by Lenin, Stalin, and other communist leaders, which is an authoritarian rule. So democracy is not an idea; it's a Western idea. So they wanted to have a strong man as long as they get safety and economic. If they could have the bread and safety, they didn't care what type of government, whether the individual liberties are there or not. No, because it's a Western idea of this individual liberties, freedom of speech, all this, which is enshrined in the Constitution. So now, when Putin took over power, he was very chummy with the West for a while. But then, as oil prices started to rise, his coffers started making money because for the Germany and other countries, oil, gas, and fossil fuels they sold, and it made his power started to rise, economic growth, and that is when this BRICS term was coined, the rising powers in Russia, China, India. I'll come to Brazil. And Putin consolidated his power by changing the constitution. And just like President of China, Xi Jinping, he also would like to be the president for life. And currently, thought he even brought back the Soviet Union national anthem. Yes, can you believe? And tried thought taking over Crimea would have a problem. He didn't see any problem. He took over. The world didn't say anything. I mean, it said, but didn't do any military action. So then he thought he could take over the entire Ukraine. Bit by bit, he wanted to take over. If Ukraine was easy for the pluck, he would have gone to Moldova possibly, and later to the Baltic countries, even though they are under NATO. Baltic countries are the Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, because like 3 to 5% Russians there, and so to protect them. Now he's mired in the conflict in Ukraine, and recent news to say like there is even a possibility of war is threatening the West, that it could end up in a conflict with the West directly, with the US. Let's move on to Brazil. Brazil. Brazil's growth is not as similar as these countries, but in the 21st century, there was a leader, newly elected leader, Lula, Lula. He is from a labor union leader. He worked his way from the very bottom, really, not only in politics, but also in life, and he became the president of the country. And Lula introduced many programs which are revolutionary in and very commendable, including um, poverty alleviation programs. Poverty alleviation programs, especially Brazil, is a very highly unequal society and a very heterogeneous society, because it has a mix of, as you might know, it's Portuguese were the colonizers, um, only state in Latin America, largest state, um, and other parts were Spanish occupiers. And so they're Portuguese, still Portuguese speaking country, white, black, and Native American, Native indigenous people mix. The black people are still treated as second class citizens. It's a whole different topic by cops and other things, statistics, the way they get the treatment. So inequality, there are a lot of slums and also very wealthy. Lula was replaced by a man which is very similar to Donald Trump, far right, Bolsonaro. And Bolsonaro was the president during time of COVID crisis when it hit. And just like Trump, he minimized the thing, and there were many deaths in Brazil, even in the Amazon areas. Now Lula came back to power very recently. Economic growth of Brazil is they export iron, meat, and the problem is it has a wonderful resource, Amazon rainforest. Rainforests are the home to some of the amazing biodiversity in the world, period. And it is getting destroyed. Acres are getting destroyed every day because of palm oil and also for animal agriculture. Because meat production takes more land usage, and trees are cut, and in rainforests the soil level is very thin, so when you're cutting the trees, the soil erodes after that. The surface becomes thick. You cannot plant trees again and to grow. And when biodiversity, when a deforestation happens in a tropical forest, many of biodiverse animals goes with it. So it is a problem, not only for Brazil, but also for the world, because Amazon forests are the lungs, tropical forests, all of the lungs of the planet. They suck carbon dioxide, store carbon dioxide, and convert it into oxygen. All those capacities are draining away. Brazil's growth is not as it was touted out to be, but it is the largest country in Latin America, and Lula's program of handing out money, which is, even many conservatives supported it in history, even conservative economists have supported it, to as so that they could come to a level, so not struggle for basic needs, then after that they could look for better life opportunities. But they're not just giving away money for like free. They have to do certain things, like they have to vote, they have to do their minimum checklist they have to do in order to regularly get money. So it gives people incentives to do the right things in order to keep getting the money. Anyway, because of time, I'll stop it here, talk about the Middle East in the next last lecture. Thank you very much.